Welcome everybody again to another episode of the ideaXme show, the show that profiles humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping our world, inspiring the future creators, future technologies, and all those great stories. I'm Ira Pastor, your life sciences ambassador along for the journey today. So to set the stage a bit, the global market for pet care is booming. With North America alone expected to hit the $300 billion range by the year 2025. And while many may associate the Mars Corporation, the leading confectionery company in the world, with brands like Twix and Snickers and Milky Way and so forth, they also happen to be one of the world's largest players in the area of pet care. We're honored today to be joined by Dr. Angela Hughes, who is a veterinary geneticist at Mars Petcare and also Global Scientific Advocacy Relations Senior Manager as well. Dr. Hughes is both a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine and also has a PhD with a focus in Canine Genetics, both from University of California, Davis. Dr. Hughes also serves as Veterinary Genetics Research Manager of Wisdom Health, which is a business unit of Mars Petcare, which has developed a range of state-of-the-art genetic tests for companion animals, leading to really revolutionary personalized pet care, and we'll get into that later on in the show. She also serves as a veterinary geneticist of Hughes Veterinary Consulting, focused on small animal and equine genetics, with a special interest in small animal reproduction and pediatrics. Dr. Hughes is published in multiple academic journals, including the Journal of American Veterinary Medical Association, and has contributed chapters for publication in Veterinary Clinics of North America Small Animal Practice, Pediatrics, and Large Animal Internal Medicine. Dr. Hughes, thank you for taking the time to come on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's a great pleasure to have you. Typically we start things off by handing our guests the floor for a little bit just to talk about themselves. If you could start off by sort of going into your background, a little bit of how you developed an interest in veterinary medicine, in animal health, and a little bit of your path to date and how you arrived at Mars Petcare, a little bit of what your current role is. I think that'd be a great way to sort of lay the groundwork for everything else we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, so I've had a bit of a circuitous path, which I guess is probably not uncommon among folks that you've talked to, but starting out as a young child, my father was a doctor and my mother was a nurse, and so I had exposure to human medicine and was like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I spent some time working in my father's practice and helped out with, filing and medical building and all of that sort of thing, and I was like, yeah, not really for me. I had an interest though I saw the movie Abyss, if you remember way back when, and they were doing these great things in these submersibles under the ocean, looking for cool stuff. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I will be the engineer that makes those submersibles. And then I got into college and I took some physics, and I spent the summer actually teaching horseback riding at a summer camp that I'd gone to since I was 6 years old and learned to ride there. And one of the horses got pretty severely injured and had to have the veterinarian come out several times to take care of it. I caught a joint in its rear leg on a fence, on a barbed wire fence, and opened a hole in his knee joint essentially. And that's a very dangerous thing. You don't want to get your knee infected, and so the veterinarian was out regularly to check on it and that sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time with the veterinarian helping with that. And I was like, you know what? It dawned on me. I did not want to go to the bottom of the ocean to, build the submersible to get there. I wanted to go to the bottom of the ocean to see what was there. And that's when I decided, veterinary medicine rather than human medicine, which I'd already, nixed, was the way to go. And so I went back to school that summer after my freshman year, and I changed my major, and I became, instead of a physics engineering major, I went and did biochemistry and molecular biology, did my thesis in genetics and all that good stuff, and then went to veterinary school at UC Davis. And while I was there, I had an interest and a passion for zoo medicine, actually. Unfortunately, a lot of people want to go into zoo medicine, or fortunately, as the case may be. And it's a really tough field to get into. It's not, really lucrative. Many of the internships I was looking at would be unpaid, things like that. And I'm like, well, I still need to eat. So I was like, you know what? I've got this genetics background. I will go and be a geneticist, and I will tell them which pandas to breed together, and which cheetahs to breed together, that sort of thing, and get into it kind of through that back door. So I did my PhD in genetics. I got a residency at UC Davis as well in veterinary genetics, which was, one of only two in the country at the time. In fact, I think it might still be one of only two. And so it was a really great experience. And while I was doing that, I also got to spend a lot of time with our reproduction specialist and dabble there, which is interesting because, again, my father, who is a OBGYN, an obstetrician and gynecologist for humans, and I was doing it for animals. It was kind of funny. But needless to say, I finished up with my PhD and my residency and all that stuff right around 2008, 2009, and thought I'd go into academia. But unfortunately, with the kind of economic recession that was hitting then, the market for academic veterinary geneticists was not very broad and big. And thankfully, one of my contacts at University of Pennsylvania knew about a role that had opened up at Mars on this new, genetic testing thing they were doing. And so he put me in touch with them. And so I got in the early days of the Wisdom Panel. They had just launched into the market when I joined in 2008. And the rest is history. And quite honestly, I was a little reticent at first because I thought I was going to be an academic and a researcher. And then I realized I can do a lot of the same things. I can educate and I can do research and do all of that sort of thing within the framework and have an impact on a much broader number of patients ultimately than perhaps doing it within a university or veterinary school. So I've accomplished a lot of the same things I wanted to do originally, just through a different path. And so I spent about 10 years with the Wisdom Health team, working on the Wisdom Panel, creating Optimal Selection, which was the first of its kind genetic test to identify, compatible breeding animals, breeding dogs together through genetic diversity. So basically, instead of telling them which pandas to breed together, I told them which dogs. And then we've since moved that over into the cat field. So a lot of cat breeders are using it as well to help improve the genetic health of their kittens. And so it's kind of all come full circle, which is kind of interesting. And now I have taken my passion for educating and communicating the science and moved into my current role, which is the senior manager for advocacy within our global pet care businesses. So my job really is to help explain to everyone all the great science that we're doing within Mars Petcare. So be it genetics or talking about some of the other projects that we're working on. And my two big areas of expertise, as I think we'll cover later, are the human-animal interaction and human-animal bond, and then also biomarkers, so measures of health and disease within the individual animal. So genetics falls into that, and other tests that we're developing and bringing to market that we'll talk about too. So a lot of fun stuff.
Well, let's start off with the topic of the human-animal bond. We had a little discussion on this topic about a year ago. We visited with Phil Tedeschi in Denver, specifically looking at sort of the opportunities for this human-animal relationship in children of trauma and in prisoners. But you're looking at things from a much broader perspective, specifically in this area of social isolation and loneliness that we are all in the middle of this pandemic experiencing. I have a house of 3 kids here, but I'm still kind of lonely. Glad I have a pet. But anyway, so Mars has a fascinating relationship with this organization, the Human Animal Bond Research Institute, where you're looking, deeply at this topic. Can you talk a little bit about, well, first the issues with social isolation and loneliness per the pandemic, but also some of what you are seeing in terms of obviously the benefits to having pets around during times like this, but also potentially how that trickles down to other important mental health indications that our animals, our animal friends can be so good at helping us deal with.
Yeah, so even before this pandemic, social isolation and loneliness was a growing epidemic, and has been noted by several researchers and even some luminaries like Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the 19th Surgeon General under President Obama, and who was recently tapped now by the Biden administration to lead their coronavirus task force. He realized during his stint as Surgeon General that loneliness is really a massive health problem in our society, and so he just published a book. Small plug here. I just read it. It's really good, called Together, and gives a lot of the research and information around loneliness and how to overcome that through non-pet means. I will say I was a little disappointed we didn't get a pet chapter in there. But needless to say, this epidemic of loneliness and isolation has been equated to the equivalent of about smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it has tremendous health impacts, similar to, say, the obesity crisis that we're facing. And more and more people were already reporting the effects of loneliness within our society as we, kind of tend to become less connected to others. We're one of the most connected and yet most isolated, societies ever. And so a lot of the research is showing that for our own mental and physical health, we really need that connection. And pets are one of the ways that we can achieve that. And so the research is also showing that we can see with pet interaction and or pet ownership, decreases in depression and loneliness and things like that. So pets are really one of the ways that we could potentially alleviate a lot of the health ramifications, mental and physical, that we're seeing as a result of this epidemic. That's only been exacerbated, obviously, through COVID and limiting people further.
Along those lines, the physical health issues, but also can you talk about some of the other mental health things that you might be seeing that are more easily remedied by having a dog or a cat or a bird around? Any interesting insights there? Are certain pets better than others in certain cases?
So yeah, research has shown about 61% of Americans report feeling lonely, and having companionship from another individual within your home, or having access to another non-judgmental animal that's going to spend time with you has a lot of real applications in terms of helping you feel a sense of responsibility. So a lot of people feel that they have a purpose in their life when they have a pet to take care of. They also pets often act as social lubricants or a means of getting a conversation started. So people who have a dog tend to be more active, more physically active, because they go out and walk more often. And then they're also more likely to engage in conversations with their neighbors and know their neighbors, because the dog is a great icebreaker. They want to ask, what's the dog's name? What's the dog's breed? And of course the dog goes right up to people, whether or not you want them to sometimes. And so it really acts as a means of aiding us in connection. And then people always laugh and say that the internet was built for cats, because cats don't go outside by and large. So people connect over cats through the internet. And I will say our cat has become quite the star between myself and my husband's meetings. She has made herself known and shared a lot with our colleagues how much she enjoys being with us and also on our warm computers. So she's right there front and center. So again, even when we're isolated like this, a cat can also engage us and get us talking with friends and family and coworkers in ways we might not have otherwise, because she inserts herself. Again, fish and birds, it depends on the relationship. We've had, back in graduate school, we had a really amazing green terror cichlid who we, named GT of all things. And then GT was followed by GT Junior. But some fish, in particular cichlids, can have quite the personality. And this fish had us trained. He would spit rocks at the side of the glass of the tank, and then that would cause somebody to go over and feed him. Well, he figured that out pretty quickly, and so he had us trained. Birds are similar in that they can be incredibly interactive and also very long-lived. So some of the parrots and things like that can live 50, 60 years. So we don't want to underestimate the impact that those alternative pets, if you want to say non-dogs and cats, can have on people. Horses also. So while most of the human-animal interaction and human-animal bond research has been done primarily on dogs and to some degree cats and horses, we don't want to leave out the fact that fish and birds and reptiles and all that sort of thing bring a lot to a lot of people's lives and can really add to the conversation as well.
Another area you mentioned in the intro, which you're very passionate about, and Mars is taking this real leadership position, is in preventative care and working with many of these technologies. We talk about them from the human perspective on the show a lot, things like artificial intelligence and smart devices and genetics and so forth. You're really doing some amazing things and have done in the pet science world in many ways, in a much more sort of advanced and sort of combinatorial way that in comparison to what we see in the human field. I think I'd like to start with sort of the genetic side because of your background as a geneticist as well, and talk a little bit about the wisdom panel and sort of the things that you've learned there and been involved in. Also, because you've screened, it seems you screened for so many different health conditions. I'm just very interested in some of sort of the possibilities here in terms of predicting certain diseases, and then also thinking about the various types of products that we use for our pets in terms of foods, and we've bird vitamins and things of this nature. The ability to sort of tailor, whether nutrigenomics or whatever the proper term is in the veterinary space, for our pets.
Like I mentioned, the wisdom panel really got onto the market in late 2007. So we've been around for 13-ish years or so. And in that time, we've tested over 2 million dogs around the world. So it's not just in the US, it's very popular in other areas like Europe and Australia as well. And originally it was thought to be the easy thing to do. Let's, enter the genetics market and talk to people about what their mixed breed dog was. Funny thing, that's actually really controversial because people think they know what their dog is. And when you tell them it's something different, they don't always agree with you. So then you have to break it down and explain to them how it all works and how it all comes together, which then kind of led into our work on traits. So we're actually really well known for understanding the genetics of coat colors and traits in dogs and that sort of thing, and helping people understand that. So we've published several studies around different genetic coat colors and such like that to help people, to help breeders understand what's already in their breed that they may or may not have known about. But then also on the mixed breed side, understand how this breed combination can come together and look like a Basset Hound mix, and yet there's no Basset Hound in that dog whatsoever. So that's kind of where we kind of got our grounding and our footing. And then over time, as you mentioned, we've added a lot of health condition mutations as well. So again, interestingly enough, in the dog kind of genetic makeup, dogs originated from wolves probably somewhere around 15 to 30,000 years ago. And then, over time, particularly in the last, couple hundred years, we have branched dogs off into all of these different breeds. There's over 400 different recognized breeds. So depending on when a certain mutation arose, was it an ancient mutation and then it got spread across the whole range of dogs, or is it a more recent mutation and therefore it's only found in one breed or maybe a couple of breeds or somewhere in between? You can see where these diseases arise and where they're found. And oftentimes, the research has been done in very specific small groups. This mutation or this disease is a problem in beagles, therefore we're going to look at it in beagles. Okay, well, we found the mutation, this causes a problem in beagles, now we're going to only look for it in beagles and try to get rid of it. Well, what if that mutation is also found in the English foxhound? If you don't go look for it and you don't look broadly enough in the English foxhounds, you may miss it. So that's what's really fascinating about how we approach it from the wisdom panel perspective, is that we test all dogs for over 200 different genetic health mutations. And then we can find these discoveries where certain mutations are found across 5 different breeds rather than just one, or 20 odd breeds instead of a handful. So it doesn't limit us to only thinking, oh, this are the problems in this breed. Now we can look at the, across the breadth of it. And then the question becomes, how much does this mutation impact a dog from this breed versus that breed? Are there other conditions in the genetics or in the environment of the dogs that also plays a role? So that's uncovering all sorts of new questions and research to look into. So it's, we're just at the beginning, but it's really amazing how far we've come even in 10 years or so, to the point where we can do all of this analysis. And to your point, the test that's probably one of the most critical that's on our panel is called MDR1, or multi-drug resistance. Multi-drug resistance 1 is the gene. Mm-hmm. The condition essentially is multi-drug sensitivity. And again, it was originally identified in collies back in the 80s, when they noticed that some collies were having adverse reactions to a medication called ivermectin. Over time, they found the mutation that caused it in collies, and then they kind of looked in a few other herding breeds. Well, now we can see it across all sorts of different breeds that you would have expected it in because they're related to collies, or you wouldn't have expected it in. We're seeing it very commonly now in Chihuahua mixes and these bully dog mixes, like the American Staffordshire Terrier mixes and things like that. So it has spread far and wide. And what it does is that it is a pump in your blood-brain barrier. It causes this pump that, you're given a medication or a toxin or whatever, and it goes throughout your body, and this pump is supposed to get it out of your brain really quickly. Well, if your pump is broken, you can't pump it out. So it has to just slowly diffuse out. Well, dogs that have even one, so normally you get 2 copies of all of your genes. If one of them is broken, you have half the number of pumps that you normally would. Or if you have 2 of them that are broken, you have no pumps. And so those dogs, when they're given certain medications like ivermectin, the anti-diarrheal drug loperamide, which is the over-the-counter Imodium. There's a few other medications we commonly use in veterinary medicine called acepromazine, butorphanol, those sorts of things, that when those medications are used, even in standard doses that should be safe, these dogs actually do see some side effects from that, where they might have some mental depression. They can lose their eyesight for a little while. They can go as far as having seizures and even go into comas and potentially die as a result of this. So it's really important to know that information early in a dog's life, so the veterinarian, should they ever be in a position where they need to use one of those medications, they can go, okay, well, I need to reduce the dose I'm giving this dog, or I need to substitute something else so that this dog doesn't have those adverse reactions. So that MDR1 mutation is super critical. And what we're finding is that it's coming up in about 1.5% of all of the dogs that we're testing across the board. And as a veterinarian, that's one of our first things, is we don't want to cause any harm. Sure. So knowing this sort of information is really helpful, so that I can make the best recommendations to my patient and avoid having less than desirable outcome. So the good news is most of these dogs can survive and get through it, but it can be a rather scary experience for the clients, and obviously not something that you want to encounter. So the more of that sort of thing, we have, blood clotting mutations that can increase bleeding after trauma or after surgery, that sort of thing. So knowing those sorts of things in advance and having your dog's profile, genetic profile, is really helpful for managing that dog and providing them the best possible care over their life.
Moving to the sort of more of the tech side of things, the smart devices and the AI. Again, your team is doing some really amazing things here. You have sort of this Whistle Pet Insight project where you have wearables for dogs and looking at sleeping patterns and certain dermatological conditions. You have this fascinating AI technology for cats and to predict renal disease. Amazing stuff. Walk us through some of this, if you would, and what you're most excited about in terms of these tools moving forward.
Yeah, the Pet Insight project, as you mentioned, is really fascinating. They used the Whistle, which is a collar device. It's a little box that you put on your dog's collar or cat, if you have a big enough cat. And it can literally measure their activity levels 24/7. And that's everything from eating to sleeping to, activity, so running around, to licking and scratching. And where that becomes really helpful is that you get quantifiable data that leads to insights in finding out, oh, I'm seeing an uptick in my dog's scratching. So you might be able to recognize earlier than you would have otherwise that we're having a breakthrough on your dog's, skin allergies, and you need to go see the veterinarian, or you need to up their medication or change their diet or something along those lines. And find that out with quantifiable data rather than the client who's like, I think they're scratching a little bit more than they did before, or the Pet Insight project has enrolled almost 100,000 dogs to date, and they've scored over 16 million days worth of data on these dogs. So it's a ton of data, and they're finding, they've correlated it with their Banfield medical records. So when many of these pets are enrolled as patients at Banfield. So they've combined the medical data with the activity data plus owner observations and videos that they've sent in. So it's a citizen scientist piece as well. And they're putting that all together and using AI to see patterns within that data that they can then predict, all right, this dog is starting to have an issue with X. So skin disease has been a really great early win. Another one was they noted changes how long it took a dog to recover fully from a spay or neuter. So when you have your puppy and 6 months or so of age, you tend to go in and get them spayed or neutered, and they look like they bounce back within a few days. Well, their full activity level did not get back to pre-spay or neuter levels for 4 weeks. So that gives you, a friend had some surgery shortly after that data came out, and I was like, you need to give yourself some time, realize that you think you need to turn around and be ready to go within a few days, but your body is still recovering and is still processing and healing and all of that sort of thing. So we need to be aware and give our dogs and cats time to fully recover and not ask too much of them right away. So that sort of thing. So insights like that we would not have had before. As I mentioned, the skin conditions is a big one. I have an allergic or atopic dog upstairs. And so knowing quantifiably, is this medication regime working? And if we change it, is it better or worse? And not just relying on me saying, well, I think I see her scratching more or less. If we change her diet, will that have an impact? It gets much more granular and refined, and we can get to a much better outcome using that data. Another area that I would love to see some progress on, again, having a former dog who had epilepsy, is really kind of getting a better handle on maybe seizures and seizure activity and that sort of thing, which I think is another one they'll be tackling in the future. Cardiac events, so dogs that might have changes in the quality of their heart over time, and you can again start quantifying that perhaps earlier than you would have otherwise. Arthritis is another area as well. So as a dog starts getting a little bit, or cats get arthritis too, hip dysplasia and things like that, start getting a little creakier and such like that, maybe we need to increase their medication to help them manage their pain better, so we can have a better outcome and they can live a healthier and happier life overall. Wonderful. So that's the Pet Insights project in a small nutshell.
Very cool.
Renal Tech is another exciting one where Mars took 20 years worth of data on 170,000 cats. And again, over 700,000 Banfield veterinary visits. They looked at all of that medical data and used over 600,000 computing hours to analyze it and figure out what was the best predictors, starting with 30 different parameters, over 30 different parameters, what are the best parameters or predictors of impending kidney disease in cats, which is the #1 killer of cats over 5. So again, it's a big problem within the veterinary world, is how to handle kidney disease in cats and how to recognize it early, because over 60% of the kidney is already gone by the time we can typically diagnose it. And so picking up on it early is really helpful. So what Renal Tech does is it looks at, again, patterns. It's all AI looking at patterns, is what the future holds with all of this big data. And recognizing that when I see this pattern, it might be subtle, it might be slight changes in these parameters that we would be monitoring in our blood work in our cats and things. As those start to just inch up ever so slightly, it's not enough for me as a person to look at and go, oh, well, the creatinine's now 0.1 above where it was, 2 years ago. But the computer can see that difference and go, yep, that along with the BUN changing and the cat's age and the specific gravity of the urine all starting to inch up, that is something that this cat would get a flag and say, you're at risk for developing chronic kidney disease within the next 2 years. So again, that gives the veterinarian the wherewithal to intervene early, have that conversation with the client, perhaps consider making some changes in the care of that individual cat to overall either delay or mitigate some of the repercussions of developing kidney disease for that individual, and again, lead to a longer, healthier, happier life. And since it launched about a year ago, they've tested over 400,000 cats in the US and Canada for Renal Tech. Over 50% of them are predicted to develop renal disease in the next 2 years. Now, this is a bit of a skewed population since most of these cats are over 9 years of age, which is when we would typically expect them to start developing kidney disease. So that's not terribly surprising. What we would like to see, though, is in future get more veterinarians and pet owners, cat owners, to do more regular testing, because this is, basic CBC, urinalysis, and chemistry panel parameters that we're using. Start doing that more frequently in the kind of midlife range. They do it mostly as kittenhood when they're, getting ready to spay and neuter, and then, towards the end of life. And really, if we can hit that middle section and pick up on those cats when they're starting to develop early indicators at 4 or 5, 6 years of age, those are the cats where we really think we can intervene and make a big difference for. So that's the future, and hopefully we can get there soon.
And while we're on it, because you've talked a lot about sort of these diseases of aging, it just sparked something in my mind. And if this is confidential, or if I think we can go right by it, I did a couple shows a few months ago. One was actually at the University of Washington, and one was here at Roswell at Cancer Park, both focusing on sort of just general dog longevity. One was a rapamycin study with 10,000 dogs. Another has to do with retired sled dogs. Just interested in sort of your views on sort of when you're working on disease of aging, just the process, the processes of aging in general, and what you might think of some of these studies, and whether you've ever actually been involved in any of them. I mean, they're sort of a stepway to human longevity studies, but any thoughts, insights on these types of programs?
I'm familiar to some degree with the Dog Aging Project, the University of Washington. I can't speak to the one at Roswell per se. What I can say is that, dogs and cats in general are living longer because we are providing them with better care, quite honestly, and more of them are living the good life indoors and not spending so much time outside where they're at greater risk for trauma and things like that. Sure. So overall, we are seeing an increase in dogs and cats living much longer than we did, a few decades ago, which is fabulous. Dogs and cats provide an interesting model in that they share our environment. So they are great sentinels for, concerns. So that's a lot of the research is going to be based in that as well, in understanding what, all of the world around us has on the effects it can have on us, because obviously they have a much shorter lifespan, sadly. So that can be monitored more. We do see changes in the DNA as you age, obviously, and so there certainly are studies examining that in a number of places, and looking at, could we develop something where you could look at the DNA and identify then the age of the dog or the cat. In terms of, I think that's kind of the next frontier in genetics, and a lot of people are really keen on it, is looking at cancer, because obviously that is really what's hitting a lot of our dogs and cats now, that they don't die of other things. And so a lot of people get upset that their pet develops cancer at 15, and I'm like, well, something kind of has to come up. And so that's where we're at. And dogs, certainly cats to some degree, but dogs especially, are proving to be a really good model for cancer in humans. And my hope is that the dogs will also benefit as a result of that, because, as we learn more and more about the cancer in dogs to help humans, we learn more and more about cancer for dogs. And so there actually is several things going on. One is Matthew Breen out of North Carolina State University does a lot of studies in dog genetic cancers, and has developed a test to look at bladder cancer in dogs. And so he uses a urine sample to find mutations in the DNA of the cells that go out with your urine to identify when a dog is developing early stage bladder cancer, which is great because that is a very aggressive cancer and not the easiest to diagnose. So that's one of those sorts of things. But yeah, in terms of aging in general, I think, there's a number, like you said, a number of studies that are ongoing, and I think we're going to learn a lot in the next 5 to 10 years probably about that, with the help of those studies. At this point in time, it's still, the sky's the limit as to what we'll find out, but there's a lot to be learned.
Angela, coming back to you, typically we ask a wrap-up question on the show about important mentors or influencers throughout your career. Obviously, you've no doubt met many individuals along your path in academia and industry and so forth. Any specific people that you might want to mention, shout out to at this point of the show that, if it wasn't for them, Dr. Angela Hughes would not be doing this, would be at the bottom of the ocean working on oil rigs and stuff like that, as opposed to dealing with the diseases of our companion animals?
Oh, that's a long list. Certainly I have to, thank my advisor in undergrad. So I went to Reed College here in Portland, Oregon, and Dr. Russell, Peter Russell, was hugely influential in, kind of opening my eyes to the world of genetics. And that then sparked and launched, my career as I know it to a large degree. The unnamed veterinarian, I don't remember who they were that I met at that summer camp, obviously opened my eyes also to the world of veterinary medicine. The dean at the veterinary school, when I didn't get in my first time, I was applying to UC Davis as an out-of-state student, and they only had 2 spots and I did not get one of them. And so I called to ask about how I could improve my application, the next year. And he walked me through it and spent the time. And I was very pleased and surprised that he took that time and helped me there. My advisors on my thesis, my PhD thesis and such like that, Dr. Anita Oberbauer and Danica Banish. And then obviously the folks at Mars, again, too many to name, but Frank Mars, I've had the pleasure of working closely with a family member, and that's been a fabulous connection. And he is very insightful, very forward thinking. I've been very impressed with how, he's thinking 10 and 20 years down the line. and pushing us to think beyond the immediate. Neil Fretwell, who was an early mentor and boss within the team, and then my current boss, Carrie Deverall, who's helped me kind of, pivot my career to some degree into the communication side of things and learn those ropes. So a lot of people who really have stepped up and helped out, and I wouldn't be where I am without them. And obviously many friends and family. You mentioned that Mars is the most well known for our M&Ms and our Snickers bars and things like that. And I like to throw out the trivia that Snickers was named after the family horse. The horse was named Snickers, and so that's where the name of the Snickers bar came from.
Very interesting. I did not know that. Although I do know, because I've been at the headquarters of Mars several years ago in a different life, but I know everyone's in a cubicle.
Yes, open office. They adopted the open office much before
I was there.
It was popular, and up until today, we still have open offices. Not that most of us are in them right now. We'll see if those last after the pandemic, but they're very egalitarian. It doesn't matter if your name is Mars or Hughes. You have a cubicle desk, and everybody gets to share amongst it, and they really fostered the collaborative spirit within the company. And it's very principle driven. So we have our 5 principles that we have to think about to guide us, which is really helpful as well. So it's been a great company. It's privately owned, which I find helpful again because we can be more future thinking. We still have to make our numbers and all that good stuff, but it's a different type of outlook, and I really appreciate that. And the family really loves animals and loves pets, and so we've been in the pet care world since the first acquisition of a dog food company in England in the 1920s. So we've grown into the world's largest pet care company and the largest employer of veterinarians in the world, as far as I'm aware. So a lot of great stuff going on here.
Absolutely. Sounds like an exciting place to be. So.
Yep.
Well, Angela, it's really been a fun time listening to you and taking us along this journey of what you've done and where you're going with it. Really fascinating. Wishing you the best with the next steps in the process. And for everybody that's going to be watching on this YouTube channel or listening across the various podcast networks, you've been listening to Dr. Angela Hughes, veterinary geneticist and global scientific advocacy relations senior manager at Mars Petcare, veterinary genetics research manager at Wisdom Health and Hughes Veterinary Consulting. Angela, thank you for taking the time to come on the show today and educate us a little bit. Thank you for everything you're doing for all of our pets. And as we say, thank you for moving the human story forward, but also the companion animal story forward. It was a really great time having you. And once again, appreciate you taking the time to do this with us.
Thank you so much for having me.